Welcome to Mission Majjhima, Ajahn.
Ajahn.
So, Ajahn, tell us about the Vanapattha Sutta, Majjhima number 17.
So the Vanapattha Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 17, the Forced Groves, is a interesting discourse where the Buddha speaks about how one should evaluate the situation in which one is living and whether to stay or to go. So basically he goes through a cycle of speaking to six different places upon which one can live dependent, or in which one can live, or near which. And then with each place goes through four different kind of instances of one's practice and requisites within that place, determining whether one should leave or stay. So the first situation or place the Buddha speaks to is this secluded grove or forest grove, Vanapattha. Ajahn Jeff translates it as forest hinterland. And the Buddha says that if, while dwelling in such a place, a practitioner their practice is not progressing, their mindfulness is not becoming established, samadhi is not deepening, and they're not achieving liberation, and they are not easily receiving requisites, then they should leave. He then gives another instance where their practice is not progressing, but they are receiving requisites. And in the first instance, the Buddha says they should leave anytime, day or night. But in the second instance, the Buddha says they should reflect, I did not go forth for the sake of these requisites. And in the monastic life, these requisites are clothes, are robes, lodging, food, medicinal requisites. And then one should leave after reflecting. The third instance is one should, if one's practice is progressing, but the requisites are not abundant, then one should stay. Considering that the practice is the key metric. And the fourth instance is one's practice is progressing and the requisites are abundant and bountiful, in which case one should remain as long as one lives. And he repeats this fourfold kind of framework for each of the six places. So a forest grove, a village, a town, a city, a janapada, which is the Pali for country, and a person, an individual, a pugala. And in each, he repeats those four frameworks, and of particular note, perhaps, is the situation of dwelling in dependence upon a person. There's been different interpretations of this, either as speaking to a monastic dwelling in dependence on a layperson for their requisites, or dwelling in dependence on a teacher. It's just a very interesting sutta in really clarifying, what is the key metric of staying in a place of our practice, and what should we be paying attention to? So Ajahn, what do you find interesting in this sutta worth drawing out?
One reason I love this sutta, and why I've recommended it to other people, is that it gives a great kind of touchstone for evaluating where you're going to practice. Like, a lot of people have this question, what monastery should I go to? What teacher should I go live with? What meditation center should I go and practice at? And this sutta provides that. And it takes as its two metrics, as you said, spiritual growth or non-growth, and physical comfort, creature comfort, versus deprivation to some extent. And it's always the spiritual growth that one is looking at. And I think that's great. And it's almost the exact opposite of what most people, when they're going on vacation, what they look for. They look for maximizing creature comforts, the best food, the best clothing, all the best, most exciting things, and whether one progresses in, wholesome mind states, in maturity, doesn't matter really at all if one's getting one's pleasures. Whereas this is the exact opposite. So looking at the metric of evaluating where one goes and where one stays is based on, is one growing in four things, the Buddha says, is mindfulness, is one's unestablished mindfulness becoming established, is one's unconcentrated mind becoming concentrated, is one abandoning the asavas, and is one attaining liberation. And I feel something else which is really important is virtue. And this is one I'm kind of assuming in this sutta that the Buddha is talking to monks who are monastics, who are well established in their precepts, because he doesn't mention that. But that's not at all given for most people. And if you go and stay somewhere and it's actually exacerbating your bad habits, it's making you not be able to keep the precepts that you want to be able to keep, you're drinking, gambling, drugs, whatever, then yeah, maybe that's not some place where you should stay. So, and Ajahn, for yourself, is there anything else you'd like to draw out from the sutta?
Yeah, I think, first I think it's a really important counterbalance to that encouragement towards seclusion, which the Buddha gives constantly, in saying, that external metric of how secluded you are in a forest or a grove or a isolated place is not the key component. It's the practice, and that's what you need to pay attention to. I think it's a really meaningful counterbalance to that restlessness, which often draws us to want to leave. The grass is always greener, and the Buddha is saying, don't believe in that impulse. And sometimes the places which push you and aren't as pleasant are actually the best places for you to be. There's a sutta called the Esokari Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 96, where the Buddha says, if while serving someone, one's faith, energy, etc., with the 5 faculties grow, then one should keep serving them, assisting them, basically. And the same thing applying here, like if your spiritual growth is being nurtured, then that's what matters. And sometimes, it can be quite a difficult place or even a difficult person to serve, but maybe what you need to learn is humility or patient endurance. And that's just such a helpful, clear metric of like, am I progressing here? And the final thing I'd note is just, there's other suttas where the Buddha points to this need to not always just be in seclusion. The Meghiya Sutta is a wonderful sutta where a practitioner goes off against the Buddha's advice into seclusion, and returning later, having been overcome or assaulted with a bunch of negative mind states, says, I really wasn't ready, Lord. And the Buddha says, it's true, spiritual friendship is important. And just remembering the key metric is this progression and purification of the heart. So it's a very simplifying sutta in terms of what we should be paying attention to. What else would you draw out of this, Ajahn? What else is interesting or have you worked with personally?
Well, one thing, just in terms of other suttas that this is similar to and that one can reference is the Sevitabha Sutta, Majjhima number 114, which is very similar, giving advice about what should be associated with, whether that's a place, a person, sight, sound, smells, taste, touch, thoughts. There are places, people, etc., that should be associated with and not be associated with. And the touch point there is whether they give rise to wholesome or unwholesome mental states. And it's interesting, when people have asked me about what monastery or place they should visit in the past, I say, you should refer to this sutta, the Vanapattha Sutta. And what the Buddha says is that you should ask yourself, is staying at this place giving rise to wholesome mental states and helping you abandon unwholesome mental states? But actually, that was a misremembering. The Buddha doesn't actually say that explicit thing here, even though he does say it in the Sevitabha Sutta. Here he's more focusing on, does it establish mindfulness? So this is an interesting point, because often when you go to some place, you've got all sorts of wholesome and unwholesome mental states, and some are going up and some are going down. Say like I go someplace and there's a challenging person there, and it's actually giving rise to more anger. But if my mindfulness is going up as well, and I'm recognizing that, then maybe I should stay, even if my anger is going up. So I think this is a rather good metric to, is my mindfulness, am I catching, am I more aware of the mental states that are arising? And also being aware of the different types of wholesome and unwholesome states that are may or may not be arising when I go to stay someplace, and obviously trying to maximize the wholesome. But there's just such a range of wholesome and unwholesome states that we're trying to cultivate and get rid of, that this kind of more higher order check of mindfulness, is that improving, might be a more useful metric. So.
Yeah, if I could just add on, I think that what you draw out there is so important. There's so many places we could go into with this sutta, but that is the key one, that we follow our likes and dislikes. And I feel like, just as people of personality types, often monasteries do, or situations do, greed, hatred, delusion. And And sometimes the best place for you to be is a situation that is contrary to your own personality type. And often the person for you to serve is someone who you don't necessarily like to serve. And yet you're right, if the metric is this deeper one of mindfulness, then that's okay.
So Ajahn, what is the word of the day?
The word of the day is parekara. And that means requisite. It's one of the 4 requisites which we spoke of, food, clothing, lodging, and medicinal requisites as a monastic. And it comes from the root kar, which means to do or to make.
All right. Well, thanks, Ajahn, and thank you everybody for tuning in. If you're tuning in live, we'll be meeting over in Zoom in just a moment, and we'll see you next week. Please join in for Majjhima number 18.
Ajahn.